Voyeurism, loneliness, and self-discovery. While those three words could be used to describe our busy lives today, they also describe two of the most important films depicting the male gaze theory. The aim of my final project is to explore the similarities and differences in the cinematography of the two American films, Rear Window, a 1954 film directed by Alfred Hitchcock, and Lost in Translation, a 2003 film directed by Sofia Coppola. I will narrow in on how the cinematography of each film depicts the important role of perspective in the male gaze theory, and how each film explores the perception of women. Analyzing films through the lens of the male gaze is important, not only because the relationships between the male and female genders are convoluted, but because films like Rear Window and Lost in Translation highlight these issues in such a creative way, allowing the audience to bring these issues to light. The ways in which women were treated in the 1950s differs from how women were treated in the early 2000s, and highlighting these issues aids in discovering the importance of each film and how our perception of the relationships between men and women have been depicted in our media. One of the most important concepts expressed to me in the duration of my time studying film is that a plethora of films have been made by men for men. This idea is described as the male gaze theory. Laura Mulvey, a feminist film theorist, has pioneered the discussion around the gaze theory since the 70s. Since the early 1990s, something akin to gaze theory has coalesced, in large part because of the wide influence of Laura Mulvey's 1975 essay, Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema. Mulvey's thesis concerning the patriarchal structure of active male gazes has spread its influence far beyond feminist film critiques of Alfred Hitchcock and Hollywood to film and cultural theory and to theory of perception generally. In a world ordered by sexual imbalance, pleasure and looking has been split between active male and passive female. Alfred Hitchcock's film Rear Window and Sofia Coppola's film Lost in Translation both provide different perspectives on the male gaze theory while also depicting similar cinematic techniques, like the point of view shot, close ups, lighting, color, and camera movement to support the theory. Rear Window, directed by a man, showcases the male gaze theory perfectly. Lost in Translation, directed by a female, critiques it. Each film provides different social concepts, largely because of the differing time period of when each film was produced, and because each film was directed by both a man and a woman. While both films were made by American directors, they are located in different countries. Rear Window is set in Lower Manhattan, New York, while Lost in Translation is set in Tokyo, Japan. The films differ in place and time, providing a contrasting view on geographical, historical, and sociocultural contexts. Hitchcock's Rear Window premiered right before the cusp of the women's rights movement in the United States, and the majority of the population was used to the conservative view of women. However, the production of films that shared the voyeuristic view of women continued into the next decade, like Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver, released in 1976. In Rear Window, Alfred Hitchcock decides to create a professional photographer who is forced to spend his summer next to the open window of his apartment from where he observes his surroundings, or, to be more precise, the other tenants of his apartment building. The physically handicapped photographer witnesses something he immediately classifies as murder, and we are sucked in right by his side in that one single room where the action happens. One of the biggest achievements of Hitchcock in this film is how he puts the audience in the perspective of Jeffries, and how Hitchcock makes the viewer feel like a voyeur. Specifically, he succeeds this by implementing extreme close-ups and point-of-view shots. While Rear Window remains in one location throughout the whole film, Lost in Translation director Sofia Coppola decided to take a different approach in order to critique the male gaze theory instead of endorsing it. The main characters, Bob and Charlotte, wander the beautiful city of Tokyo, trying to discover who they want to be. As an aged Hollywood star in his twilight, Bob leads a deeply unhappy life, full of disconnection from his wife and children. His life changes when he meets an equally lost soul of Charlotte, played by young Scarlett Johansson. The two form an unusual romantic bond as they learn to live their lives fully. The two wandering souls in Tokyo provide a very interesting perspective on the male gaze that Sofia Coppola intentionally placed. The differing time period also allows the female characters in the film to have more freedom, and we can see this through the plethora of shots of Charlotte alone. Whether it be through their escapades throughout town, we see the pair of lost souls struggling to be seen in a sea of people. Coppola provides this perspective through wide lens shots in the city of Tokyo. The colors that cinematographer Lance Accord chose to exhibit the story through are much more dull than the ones Hitchcock uses in his film. Both characters navigate not only the labyrinth of cultural differences, but also of their own solitude. Accord's cinematography employs a number of stylistic choices in visualizing these themes. The combination of the color palette and the variety of close-ups and wide lens shots draws the audience to feel uniquely alone, all while critiquing the male gaze. The very first scene in Rear Window opens with a point of view shot out of Jeffrey's New York City apartment window. Hitchcock succeeds with his voyeuristic point of view and Rear Window by sometimes recording through the eyes of Jeffrey's camera lens. The camera movements in the first scene mimic a real person gazing out of a window. The camera only shows what a real person would see, nothing too high or too low. The slow and steady pace of the camera allows the audience to grasp what Hitchcock is trying to tell them. This is Jeffrey's world, and we are just watching it. The camera pans around the neighborhood, looking at all the neighbors in the morning. We see a young woman starting her morning routine, however, this wouldn't be the male gaze if she wasn't barely clothed. The woman is seen stretching and is meant to be seen as putting on a show for Jeffries. Hitchcock makes the audience understand that we are viewing Jeffries' perspective early on in the film. The camera pans to an extreme close-up of Jeffries, making the audience understand that what we just saw and what we will continue to see will be Jeffries in this perspective. The first scene in Lost in Translation differs wildly. The film opens with an extreme close-up of Scarlett Johansson's lower half. This moment lasts for about 35 seconds and leaves the audience questioning why. Without explanation, one might see this opening scene as degrading, for exploiting a woman's body for no reason. However, this is actually an empowering moment crafted by Sofia Coppola. No one else is in the room with Charlotte during this scene, so this close-up is no one's point of view in particular. This is a prime example of Coppola critiquing the male gaze, because a male director might include this scene for exotic purposes. However, Coppola uses this close-up of Charlotte to describe womanhood. At once girlish yet unabashedly sensual, the image is an unmistakable reflection of the awkward and confusing sensation of being at the cusp of womanhood, where one is tentative and unsure about one's identity and what to do with it, but is already aware of the complexity that simmer underneath while also being confronted with the palpable physicality of one's femininity. The cinematic technique of the lingering close-up allows the audience to understand that the male gaze is being critiqued, because Coppola really wants the audience to think about the piece of film they are viewing. Both of these scenes from the two films use extreme close-ups to convey the director's message. Hitchcock wants the audience to understand in the beginning moments of the film that the story is through Jeffrey's perspective only, by showing an extreme close-up of his face. Coppola wants the audience to understand that she is critiquing the male gaze by showing an extreme close-up of Charlotte's lower half. Hitchcock also uses the point of view shot to convey his message. The voyeuristic view of his female neighbor perfectly exhibits the male gaze, while Coppola's extreme close-up makes the audience understand that she's critiquing the male gaze. The opening scenes of these films lay out how the rest of the film will follow. It is clear that these two directors had different motives for each film. Rear Window continuously showcases the point of view shot in extreme close-ups, but the film also uses other cinematic techniques like lighting in order to project the male gaze on the audience. In most scenes that occur at night, Jeffrey's apartment is dimly lit, with the only source of light being the lamps from the other apartments shining through the window. Lisa Fremont, Jeffrey's romantic partner in the film, is typically always seen in flattering soft light. In this scene, Lisa gradually emerges into the light by turning on 3 practicals to reveal herself. The darkness before the first lamp feels real, with some backlight to de-alienate Lisa's silhouette, and the faintest fill to bring out her teeth and pearls. The final, full-figure image has lost all trace of the earlier ominous motif. Lisa is finally revealed as a charming, elegant woman in an ordinary night interior. Understanding that this film is in Jeffrey's perspective, the lighting that always occurs around Lisa represents that the divine understanding of women to Jeffrey's, and to Hitchcock as well, stops at physical appearance. With most of the lighting used on Lisa being low-key lighting, the audience knows that Jeffries puts Lisa on a pedestal, showcased as an object of desire. Lighting in Lost in Translation is also significant because it provides the perspective that both Bob and Charlotte are lonely. Coppola's film uses natural lighting, which allows for the film to be viewed as reality and not fiction. When Bob and Charlotte are filmed together, the lighting on them is equally distributed. One person is not more lit than the other. When Bob and Charlotte first meet, the soft, warm lighting is placed in front of the characters, shining the light on their faces to really show their expressions. Soft lighting is used to express the dimly lit life the two characters are living, even when they are out having fun. The characters are also placed on the same plane, allowing for the audience to know that Bob and Charlotte are mentally on the same level, lost and uncertain. Overall, the film renders itself with a soft wrapping light and muted color tones that help frame the feelings of loneliness and isolation. Again, this is even more so when contrasted with the backdrop of Tokyo, mostly relocated to a view through a hotel window. Lighting is desaturated and is diffused as an overcast sky. This minimizes the visual hierarchy of the brightness composition and results in our eyes needing to search for what is important. We trend along the film with the characters, uncertain of what we should be paying attention to. Rear Window and Lost in Translation both use the same dim lighting techniques, but the central location of the lighting is always different. Where the main source of light comes from and who it highlights is important to understand what the director is trying to convey. Hitchcock wants the audience to know that Lisa is a stereotypical woman in the 1950s, wanting Jeffrey to love her, so the lighting is always soft and flattering, which creates a shadow on Jeffries. Coppola wants the audience to understand that Bob and Charlotte are one and the same, and they do not need to have a power difference. The lighting is always equally distributed, and it never highlights Charlotte more than Bob, creating the reasoning that Charlotte does not need to be visually perfect for Bob because his understanding of women goes beyond physical appearance. The differences in the films whenever it comes to the male gaze is prominent. Hitchcock is one of the reasons why the term was coined. His use of perspective through the camera movement and the frequent use of close-ups and point-of-view shots shows the audience who is in charge. Hitchcock uses lighting to exploit Lisa, putting her on a visual display to Jeffries because his understanding of women does not dive deeper than the physical appearance. However, Coppola acknowledges the theory, showing the loss of identity through lighting, as well as using extreme close-ups like the opening scene of the film. Coppola uses lighting to explain that her characters are equal, and that Charlotte does not have to be perfect for Bob. Because of the differences in time, the two films, Rear Window and Lost in Translation, have very different views on the male gaze and the role of women in society. Women were exploited in the 1950s, more than often without the consent of the female. However, in the 2000s, women were starting to become more aware and empowering the male gaze by using the male gaze on their own terms. Overall, the male gaze has evolved in film, and it is apparent that this is true through the different uses of cinematography in Rear Window and Lost in Translation.